asato ma sadagamaya tamaso maham jyotirgamaya mrityormam amritam gamaya avirmaedhi rudra yate dakshinam mukha te namaham paha nityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. And reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. Well, Happy New Year, everyone. My subject this morning is, who is a saint? And the controlling question is, how do we know who is a saint? Now, we're not talking about your saintly grandmother. And we're not talking about Saint Valentine. And we're not talking about jolly old Saint Nick. We're talking about a real classical, otherworldly saint of the highest order. A perfect saint, sage, mystic, yogi, arhat, bodhisattva. That is, someone who has realized God. Someone who has realized the Atman, the self. A God-realized person. A self-realized man. An enlightened master. How would we recognize such a person? If enlightenment is like the city of Benares, Sri Ramakrishna used to say, the saint is someone who has been to Benares. He hasn't just read about it. He hasn't just spoken to people about it or thought about it. He's actually been there. He's walked around the city. He knows it firsthand experience. And he's an authority in the matter. Now, this is a subject that, we're interested in for the simple reason that as spiritual aspirants, our ultimate ideal is to become saints, sages, mystics, yogis. This is our highest ideal, our goal, and our destination. Furthermore, we need saints and sages to help us along the path, to give us guidance, instruction, inspiration, and to embody all of those spiritual qualities that are associated with enlightenment. Now, the problem is, it's difficult to find such a person. It's difficult to know who is such a person as this. Now, I live near Los Angeles, and I know that there are many people in Los Angeles who over the course of time have laid claim to this title. And various traveling gurus and spiritual masters and even incarnations and a whole host of other various enlightened sages and masters. And each one of them, it seems, attracts a whole following of avid, eager devotees, and who prostrate at their feet, who shed tears of devotion. But it too, we see that some among those, there are some who are just promoters. There are some, not all, who are maybe frauds and pretenders to the throne. And therefore, as a result of which, sometimes devotees find that they become, it's possible that they can be disenchanted and disillusioned, either with a particular person, or maybe even become a little cynical about the whole spiritual community in general. And therefore, it's very important for us to sharpen our powers of discrimination and come to know and to understand who is a saint. That is, it seems what we need is some criteria chart. We need some standards. We need some guidelines or some way to determine who is an enlightened master. Now, there are some people who say that, so the question is, how can we know? Some people say, well, we can't know with our mind. The only way that we can know who's a saint is we have to know and feel. We can't know with our mind. We have to feel with our heart. And spirituality, they say, radiates from a realized soul like heat from a wood stove. And it's true, there is something about the mystery of human vibrations. But it's also true that the old saying is true, that it takes one to know one. And the fact is that the natural man, that is, people like ourselves, the natural man, his mind and heart are relatively impure, and as a result, cannot receive those subtle and causal vibrations of higher spiritual consciousness. Our heart is not, we can't open our heart to receive. It says in the Christian Bible in the book of Timothy, talking here about the The heart is deceptive above all things, and desperately wicked. The heart of man. So the heart maybe is not the best guide for making practical decisions in our spiritual journey. Maybe the best advice would be to use our own God-given reason. Now let's look at that. In mental science, we know very well that one of the great laws is the law of correspondence. That means is that all of our thinking, our feeling, our speech, and our actions tend to correspond and to resonate and come into alignment with each other. And even your subtlest thoughts and feelings, which are so intimate and private to yourself, get by the power of sympathetic resonance, it can find expression in your facial expressions, in your gestures, in your body language, in your behavior, in your speech, in your choice of clothing and friends, the car you drive, the house that you live in. All of these are indicators. They're all signs of who you are. And therefore, if we want to know something about something, that's just semiology. All we have to do is to focus our powers of discrimination and to begin to discern those signs. In the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, you remember how Sri Krishna gives the great discourse on the nature of the Atman and the highest spiritual truths. And near the end, he says that the man who has realized these truths is called a man of steady wisdom. And there are those last verses, the Arjuna, who's listening to this high philosophical discourse. He addresses Sri Krishna with this question. He says, yes, I understand all of what you've said about the content of his realization. That is the man of steady wisdom. But what I'm wondering is, can you tell me, how does he sit? How does he walk? How does he talk? What does he do all day? That's what Arjuna wants to know. That means he wants to be able to visualize and to kind of clarify in his mind what such a person, an idealized spiritual ideal, looks like. And in the rest of the chapter, Sri Krishna gives you one by one qualities that are typical of a knower of the highest, of the knower of the self. If you skip ahead to the 16th chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, there also the whole chapter discusses, the title of the chapter there is The Divine and the Demonic Qualities. And so there we get a long list of divine qualities, which are markers, which are indicators of a spirituality, of the highest order. And so that's a long list. You can. What I'd like to do this morning is I'd like to simplify that list. And I'd like to boil it down to something that we can quickly understand and use, that is a set of criteria whereby we can make a valid judgment. And I'm going to give you a checklist of 5 questions that we can ask of ourselves, because we want to become saints. But we can also ask of our role models, and certainly we can ask of our spiritual ideal these basic questions. Think of them as a checklist with boxes. If we can check off each box, then we can conclude, maybe we can come with a good indication that we are in the presence of a man of steady wisdom. Now let's go through this checklist. The first 2 boxes on the list are woman and gold. And that's kind of not a very politically correct term. But those of you who are students of the life of Sri Ramakrishna, you know that was his, in a nutshell, he describes what is worldliness. Well, that's what worldliness is. That's what we want to transcend. It may not be politically correct, but we get the point. We know what he means. Lust and greed. And so let's look at the first on the list. Now, a human person, that is the jiva, is by conventionally, we understand a person is a person who is a body, mind, and spirit. And by living a moral and ethical life, we can rise above our physical animal nature to become fully human. And by doing spiritual practices and cultivating spiritual virtues, not just moral virtues, but spiritual virtues, we can rise above the thoughts and feelings that rise like waves in the lake of the mind to identify with the spirit. That's what a holy man does. A holy man is a person who has transcended the body and the mind and who has now identified with the spirit. And such a person is like a caterpillar who retires into a cocoon and in course of time emerges as a butterfly. And there's no connection between the butterfly and the caterpillar. These are two different things. So spirituality means living, a simple definition of what is spirituality. Spirituality is living in the spirit. It's walking in the spirit. A saint is a person, by saint here I'm using a generic term, for every a spiritual man of the highest order is one who walks in the spirit. That means he shifted his identity from body to mind to the spirit. And he's transcended the biological, physical dimension of ourself. And that's why they say, where there is Rama, there is no Kama. Kama means worldly desires. Spiritual consciousness, just by definition, transcends all sexuality and gender identity. And a person who is identified with the Spirit, who walks in the Spirit, is not motivated by the physical passions. And therefore, usually such a person is a monk or a nun or a man or a woman, husband or wife, who live together like brother and sister. That is, in their relationship, they've transcended sexuality. Spirituality, the whole spiritual life, is a battle. It's a battle between the spirit and the flesh. And the ideal is to rise above the flesh and to identify with the Spirit. And in order to do that, you have to have a spirit of renunciation to motivate you to transcend that. And that's the fundamental in spiritual life. Once there was a young man who was, he lived in a house in the city. He couldn't sleep well because he was tormented at night by clouds of mosquitoes. And they would bite him, he couldn't get sleep. Night after night, he would toss and turn. Finally he said, that's enough. He left his house, he left the city, and he moved far away into the nearby, he moved into the nearby forest. And in the forest there, he began to live, and for a while, he lived happily. It was quiet. He didn't have to have any cares for taking care of his house. And at least he could sleep at night because the cool wind blew away all the mosquitoes. So one day he was sitting under a tree, thinking, meditating, and a tiger came through the forest and attacked him and ate him up. And so similarly, sometimes a young person may retire from the world, from all of the cares and all of the difficulties and the bills and the worries, retire from all that to an ashrama and begin to live a spiritual life away from all of these cares. And for a while, feels free and feels at peace. And yet, in the course of time, it may be that Mahamaya, like a tiger, comes and he becomes a victim of the lower passions. He has to have renunciation. That's because he doesn't have renunciation to rise above. So that's the first box. The first box is check. Remember the story? Famous guy in Indian history. He was a king. His name was Vishwamitra. And Vishwamitra had an aspiration, after the many legends of his life, to become a Brahmarshi. That means a rishi. A rishi means a sage, an enlightened person, a person of the highest order. You look at the sky at night and you see the big Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, the 7 sages. These are the people there. That's where they live. He wanted to become one of these, a Brahmarshi. And as a result, he began to do spiritual practice. He'd made a small hutment for himself on the banks of the river Kaushitaki. And then in the night he would meditate. In the morning he'd get up and he'd bathe in the river Ganges. He'd go and he'd beg his food, come back. He'd do ritual and worship service and meditate all day and do ritual in the afternoon and contemplation and meditate all night. This went on for 1,000 years. And he began to accumulate more and more power. And his power increased, and at the end of 1,000 years, even the gods, Indra and the heavens, they began to feel a little feeling of trepidation, because they don't like it when saved people do spiritual practice, because it increases their power. And the gods feel a little insecure when they see such a person like this. And so Indra hit upon a plan. He sent down a dancing girl. Her name was Menaka. And Menaka was one of a group of apsaras. You remember the Shakespeare, Midsummer's Night Dream. A little spirit beings that are born out of water. And these are the dancing girls of heaven. So he sent down, they said, here's Vishwamitra is meditating in the forest, and it's cold and it's dark, his eyes are closed, and he hears this, Menaka appears. All he hears is the tinkling of her anklets. He opens his eyes and he sees the forest become a flowering garden, and all the sweet music is playing, and there she begins to dance. Of course, he forgets about his meditation. He forgets about all that thousands of years of tapas and penance, all that's out the window. He falls head over heels in love. And soon a child is born to them. And Vishwamitra is disgusted. He renounces Menaka. Menaka also is a goddess. She abandons the poor little girl. Sets her afloat like Moses, on a little boat, in the reeds. Later on, her name was Shakuntala. Later on, she married, and she became the mother of King Bharata, the founding father of the whole of India, and all the problems of India, which all came back as karma to who? Vishwamitra. And so he lost all of his power. And they get back to square one. And so with great determination, he began again his practice. And he retired deeper into the forest. And he lived under a tree only, and he just drank the water that came off the leaves fell on the leaves of the trees, dug for roots, and there he passed 1,000 years. His power gradually increased more and more. Indra in heaven sees now that he's become even more powerful than before, and so he sent more apsaras to him. Rumba and Talotama. He's meditating, he hears the sound, he opens his eyes, he hears the music, and he sees them there, and as soon as he sees them, he remembers. He remembers all this, that is that feeling of that carnal desire arose in his consciousness, but immediately he repressed it by the power of his penance, and he became angry. And from his eyes came the gleams of fire, and with the fire he burnt those two apsaras to ashes. And in so doing, he lost all of his power. He lost all of the spiritual power he'd gained from his penance and tapas, and he had to begin over again. And so he went farther away, he went into the Himalayas, far in a cave in the Himalayas, and there he just lived on air and lived and prayed and meditated every night for 1,000 years. At the end of that time, Indra again sees what's happening. He sent a whole troop of apsaras and Gandharvas, divine musicians. And Vishwamitra sitting there meditating, he hears the sound, he opens his eyes, he sees all before him, and a smile, he begins to smile. He smiles, he claps his hands, he says, "Yes, welcome, welcome. I will here to enjoy your dance and song." He'd attained his goal. He'd become a Brahmarshi. He transcended that desire, the lower desires, or the lower passions. And so he became a Brahmarshi. Let's go to the second checkbox. Woman in gold. Well, we know what gold is. That's a problem in spiritual life. Gold means the golden calf. It means money. And everything that money can buy. It says there in the book of in the Christian Bible, the book of Timothy, that money, the love of money is the root of all evil. It's from that we can trace many of our distractions and difficulties in rising above the natural man. We're the natural man, and we're struggling to rise to the supernatural. And the source of our difficulty is that attraction for the golden calf, worshiping the golden calf. And, well, you remember, if all you have to do is to watch, remember Humphrey Bogart. Remember that old Treasure of Sierra Madre? That's the whole story. See, that's the spirit. He fell a prey, the victim of that second obstacle in spiritual life. That is the greed, the attraction for wealth and for power. It says in the Bhagavad Gita, you can read in the 6th chapter, Sri Krishna says that a man of realization who is established in the self is one who, how would you know such a person? Well, he's a person who regards a lump of earth and a stone and a gold nugget all as the same. That means he has same-sightedness. This is a great virtue in spiritual virtue. Same-sightedness doesn't make the distinction between those two, those three things. He sees them all as the same. Now, we can't imagine such a thing. Once there was a husband and a wife who together renounced the world, and they became sannyasins. And one day they were walking along the high road of life, and the husband walking in front, the wife walking 8 paces behind, like a good wife. And the husband stopped, he's walking, he looked down, what did he see at his feet? He saw the little tip of a gold coin buried in the dirt. Someone had dropped it there on the road. And so he stopped, and shuffling with his feet, he tried to cover up that coin because he was afraid that if his wife were to see that coin, it may engender in her some desire for wealth and for power. The wife, meanwhile, has come up behind him. She looks down, oh, sir, husband. I said, what are you doing there? Immediately, she understood what had happened. And seeing that little shining gleam of that gold coin, she scolded her husband, saying, what kind of a renunciate are you? Here we're living spiritual life, renounce the world, and yet you still make a difference between dirt and a gold coin. That's not a good sign. That means you haven't yet achieved a higher stage of spiritual practice. You remember how Sri Ramakrishna Sri Ramakrishna used to stand there by the banks of the river Ganges, weigh in his hands the lump of earth and rupee in his hand, earth, rupee, earth, and he'd throw them both into the river Ganges. Sri Ramakrishna is our ideal of same-sightedness. Couldn't be near money, couldn't touch money. And once when Sri Lakshmi Narayan Marwari came and saw in his room his bed cover was a little worn and needed to be replaced. He said, yes, I'll make a deposit for you for 10,000 rupees, and from the interest, it will take care of your expenses here in the room. We can get some new cloths. And Sri Ramakrishna, hearing this, he just fell unconscious as if he'd been struck on the head. When he regained consciousness, he said, please don't ever say anything like that again. I can't keep money near me. I can't touch money. This was the rumor that went around among the devotees, that he couldn't touch money, that he couldn't be near money. So fine-tuned was his nervous system. And Swami Vivekananda, the young Narendra, on one occasion, hearing this rumor, he said, okay, well, let's test it out. And he took a rupee coin and he put it under the mattress of the master's bed. And the master came back in the evening from the Kali temple, and the devotees are there, they're watching. He came in and he sat down on his bed and he jumped up as if he'd been stung by a horned fish. What is this? What is this? His whole body was burning. Then they confessed of what they had done, how they had put that coin there. Well, you remember the old fairy tale about the princess and the pea, and how the king wanted his son to marry, and princess candidates came from all over the different kingdoms, one by one, to be interviewed by the prince. And he walked with them and talked with them, but none of them appealed to him. He didn't like any of them. And time passed, a whole year passed, and he was still alone and unmarried. And then one night, the rain was falling and thunder rolling and lightning flashing, and they hear a knock on the door. It's teeming rain. And servants go to the door, and the queen with her servants went to the door, and they opened. There's a girl shivering in the rain. Oh, come in. Yes, come to dried her off. And they gave her clean clothes to put on. The queen is inquiring, my dear, he said, what are you doing out there in the rain? She says, well, I am a princess, and my kingdom was attacked by robbers. And then I lost my way in the forest, and so I got caught in the rain, and here I am. Oh, so sorry, said the queen. Meanwhile, the prince, he'd heard that this girl had appeared. He was curious, he came down, and he started talking to her. And she's talking to him. And all they have is just love at first sight. And they began talking and talking. For hours they talked. It's wonderful, what a wonderful person. And it turns out that who is she? That she's a princess. But the question arose in the mind of the prince. He said, yeah, but she's a princess. Is that possible? But is she a real princess? She has to be a real princess. And the queen said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. I'll find out. So that night, you know what happened. The queen went in, she put under a little pea under the mattress. She stacked up the mattresses 7 high, and then another on top of that, 7 more eider down quilts. Put a ladder up there, and it showed to the girl to her guest room at night. The girl climbed up there, slept all night. The next morning she came down, said, the queen asked her, well, my dear, did you sleep well last night? And the girl said, oh, no, I'm sorry, I didn't sleep well. I tossed and turned. I'm black and blue all over. There was something very hard in my bed. And then the queen knew, now she knew that she indeed was a real princess. Because only a real princess could be so sensitive. So Sri Ramakrishna's nervous system so sensitive that he responded like that. All right, we have 2 boxes. Let's go to box number 3. And I put these, and I said these are questions we have to ask ourselves, about ourselves, ask about ourselves, and it's about our spiritual ideals. And I put the questions in the form of the third person here just to make it easy. The third question is, he's renounced woman of gold, has he renounced name and fame? Name and fame. How many stories there are of tragic heroes in literature who fall in a prey to that last infirmity of noble mind, name and fame. The desire to be in the limelight, to see your name in lights, to publicize yourself, to see your face on television and in the movies, to sit on a throne and have people come, lines of people come and be worshipped by the general public. All of these are kind of narcissistic, grandiose aspirations that are alien to a holy man. You remember in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, how one of his young disciples, Babu Ram, was sleeping outside on the veranda. One night he hears some walking there. Sri Ramakrishna had risen in the middle of the night, the wee hours of the morning. He heard some sound. He peeped in the room there and he saw the master walking around in circles around in his room. And he was saying, "No, no, no, mother, no, mother." He couldn't, and Babu Ram later inquired as to what was going on. And Sri Ramakrishna, as usual, he has a vision of the Divine Mother. Divine Mother appeared before him, holding in her hand a basket of name and fame. And following him around the room, "Please accept this basket. Look at all, wouldn't this be nice?" And Sri Ramakrishna, "No, mother, no, mother." So he was able to transcend that temptation. Let's go to box number 4, or the checklist. Our checklist, we can say, about that spiritual, we can ask the question, does he practice what he preaches? That's a good question. We can ask of ourselves, or of our mentors, or of our spiritual ideal, does he practice what he preaches? Swami Vedarupananda says in one place that 85% of the people who begin spiritual life and pursue a spiritual life, 85% of them end up as cheats and hypocrites. Another 15% go mad. And the 5% that are left over, well, they make some progress. They make a little progress. So like this, we don't want to become cheats and hypocrites. We don't want our spiritual ideals to be cheats and hypocrites. And therefore, we can ask this question. Do they practice what they preach? And you remember the parable of Sri Ramakrishna, as he said, a man fell ill, and he was living in a village near Calcutta. But he was very sick, and he had upset stomach and a fever. What could he do? No doctor in the village. So he had to walk all the way to Calcutta, walked all morning, all afternoon. By the late afternoon, he got there to the doctor's office in Calcutta, came in, and the doctor saw him. He said, "Yes, well, you come back in 2 days, and I'll give you my diagnosis and prescription." And the man said, 2 days. Oh, well, okay. He can't afford to stay there in the city of Calcutta. He had walked all the way back, trudged back to the village. There he passed the night, and the next day came back. Now he walked all the way back. Came in and was seen by the doctor. And the doctor said, well, my advice to you is don't eat too much molasses. And the man said, that's it? Yep, that's it. It'll cure you. Okay, thank you. The man turned around, had walked all the way back to his village. Meanwhile, the nurse in the office, she saw all this, and she asked the doctor, she says, Doctor, why the poor man, he was here 2 days ago. Why you could have told him that? Why did you have him come all the way back? And the doctor says, well, you see, I have these jars. I keep jars of molasses in my office. That's the Indian. They eat sweet. It's like a candy. I keep jars of molasses on the shelf in my office. And I couldn't tell him that while those jars were there. He would have looked at those jars and he would have thought, well, wait a minute, the doctor eats molasses. What's the problem here? So he said I had to get rid of those. That's why I had him return. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken my advice, and it wouldn't have. So similarly it is. This is why saints exemplify that ideal. Do they practice what they preach? All of us can practice mental renunciation, but a saint of the highest order practices external renunciation also. He gets rid of that molasses. And why? Because it may be, people would see that and think, well, maybe he enjoys in secret and in solitude. So that's the fourth box. The fifth box is very simple, and that is, does he humble himself in all things? Humility, great virtue, a cardinal virtue in all religions, and a universal virtue in all cultures. That is humility. The tendency just to the unwillingness to place ourselves first, to put ourselves forward above all others. Humility is a long spiritual practice of getting control, of loosening the grasp that we have on our separate self, which is called the ego. That's our problem in spiritual life. Get rid of the ego, the I, the me, the mine, that concept. That's the ideal. Sri Ramakrishna again, our ideal, how a member of the highest caste in Indian caste system, the highest social caste, he at night during the course of his spiritual practices, he had grown long, matted hair, came down to his back and knees. At night he would go in secret, and cleanse the latrines of the untouchables, using his hair, get like a mop to clean everything up in order to establish himself in that virtue of humility. And you read in the gospel how he says that yes, the holy man, a saint, is like a tree that's laden with fruit. The branches bend low to the ground. Water that falls on a high mountain runs down off a high mountain, and it collects in low places. So that virtue, that's the virtue of humility. Swami Vedarupananda says that the humble man is someone God blesses the humble man and helps him. But humility is very difficult to achieve. It's a very high ideal. Just like all of these characteristics and qualities are very difficult to achieve. And in fact, a saint, that is to say, of the highest order, a man of realization, is like the harvest moon shining full moon in the night sky. It's a natural phenomena. That is, it happens when the circumstances are right, but it doesn't happen every day. And but because it's natural, similarly in our spiritual life, it's a natural process for us to be evolving. Our spirituality, our spiritual consciousness, we are evolving, we're moving in the course of time, when circumstances are right, then we will become enlightened and have all those qualities of a spiritual master. But at any one time, the number of people on the earth are very few. And therefore, we discussed this morning the characteristics of such a person, the person who has all of the marks of spiritual greatness. It's good for us to remember them. And I've simplified matters this morning. You can read in the Bhagavad Gita in more detail. It's good for us to contemplate these virtues so that we can visualize and we can appreciate spirituality and around us and in ourselves, and we can find the inspiration to progress and to realize our ideal of enlightenment. So I think we'll stop here, and I think that's good. We have enough.